Hey everybody, this is James from TeaDB.org, and as you can see, we are joined with regular guest Garrett.
Hey guys.
You are straight off the plane from Taiwan. No, not actually. But, we are filming our Post-Taiwan, I guess we called the last one the pre-Taiwan travel diaries. So this is the post-trip diary.
Post-trip diary,
yeah.
Yes.
So Garrett, how was Taiwan?
Taiwan was excellent.
Excellent.
Yeah, I really enjoyed my time over there. This second time, being able to kind of revisit a lot of places that I originally went in my first trip a couple of years ago, was excellent. Being able to have the experience of knowing a shop and going into a shop and saying, hey, I want to try this thing that I actually have had before, was a good grounding point for a lot of tea sessions, and it took a lot of the edge away of not quite knowing, like, ooh, is this like a shop that's actually going to provide what I need, or is it going to be something that is going to be like a less than experience? Mm-hmm. And I would say, so I was definitely able to capitalize on my prior experience in Taiwan.
Okay, so you would say that for you, going back, what you was a success.
Yeah, I would say so. Yes.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. So I guess that's one thing for me also, just to talk a little bit about myself for a hot second, is that I always enjoy traveling back to a place, just because I find that like that increased familiarity and stuff like that, and I can really hone in on things that I want to do. I'm not talking about just tea, but just like in general. So it sounds like maybe that was the case for you as well in this trip.
Yeah, so this trip I ran into a couple of issues just with like weather and getting sick for a little bit. So it was definitely a little more challenging for me just to tackle those things and kind of change my plans up, which is like a normal thing with traveling, right? Like you you get there, you have to figure stuff out. But being in Taipei and being a Westerner, I think I've mentioned this in the pre-Taiwan video, was it's just a really people there are super polite, super awesome, kind, very helpful. So if you're in a situation, usually, even when people don't know English very well, you can kind of get yourself out of a pickle with ease, especially in the city, because there's lots of options on like where to go, how to get to places. Yeah.
So people probably want to hear about the tea.
Yeah.
So can you, how was the tea there? Were you able to, were you mainly going to tea shops, or was it kind of a mix? Did you meet up with other people, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so when I was when I was in Taiwan this last time, I went primarily to a bunch of tea shops. That's where I was getting a lot of my tea drinking done for the trip. I went, and I was going into this trip with the idea that I was going to focus more on oolong. So my oolong tea drinking experience this trip was much better than previous trips that I've done to tea shops. And I would say this trip I picked up a lot of roasted oolong and a lot of aged oolong as well that I found.
And those were sort of on your hit list of teas that you wanted to focus on.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that when you kind of talk about like that drinking test, like does it pass? Is it something that I actually want to drink? Is it something that I drink with like a higher rate than other things that I own? And I had drunk through all of my oolong before going to Taiwan. So it was like one of those things where like I had you pick me up some stuff the year before. I had picked up stuff the year before that, and I kept drinking through it. The stuff that I still have stuff from my like original trip from Taiwan, so I knew that like some of this danker Pu'erh maybe I didn't want to get as much of. Right.
So you still had dank Pu'erh from 2016.
Yeah.
But you had drank through all the oolong. And I say this as I can just look a couple feet to my right at Garrett's thing, and before there was like a bunch of empty mason jars, and now I'm looking over and there's Like 7 or 8, depending on if you count the one with a bunch of tea bags that I think you got for free.
Yes.
Mason jars that are filled with tea, so good huntings.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. I would say that this trip, because I was so focused on oolong, that from a tea sourcing perspective, I did a really excellent job. Now, something that I spent a lot of time doing last trip, and I think we did this a lot together, this is the trip that we did in 2016, 2 years ago, was just a kind of dry explore. And when I say dry explore, I mean like dry run, never going to a place before and not having anybody recommend a place before to us, and just showing up at the place. This trip, I only did a couple tea shops in that way. I find that like with those, you have to build, this is something you touched on the previous video, is building a rapport with the person who's serving you tea. And when I would go to these new shops, it was all about, all right, I got to make sure that they, I got to assess their English ability because I don't speak Chinese. And then I have to assess their ability to serve me the teas that I would like to drink. And because a lot of tea shops only serve you a few teas and then it's kind of like pause, like, hey, how do you feel about these? Do you want to buy any of these? For me, I really want to pay attention to how I'm appearing first off. So I can be like, hey man, this isn't working for me. And this time I definitely had a lot more practice doing that. And so I was comfortable kind of saying, hey, can I actually try something completely different? Just pausing in the middle of a session. In Taiwan and in tea shops, I think that's a pretty normal thing to request because people have really specific tea habits there, right? And they have specific needs. So
yeah, and it serves no one's interest, yours or the tea shop person's, if they're serving you a tea that it may even be a very good tea, but that you're just like not interested in. Right. They want to serve you a tea that you might buy. So they probably appreciate that as well.
Right. So kind of going in, I guess for me, I have like this Western mentality when I'm approaching retail, where you kind of there's a lot more transactions kind of going on. Like you might go to a tea shop in the United States, and they might even charge like a small fee for like
tasting fee.
Fee, and you might not get anything. In Taiwan, I think it's because it's so much a larger part of the like mainstream culture there, and because there's just a larger tea scene in general, you can get away with or I wouldn't necessarily call it get away with, but like you can become more comfortable with requesting a wider variety of teas and not feel like you're like screwing this guy, like you're screwing him out of money or anything. Because there's just so much more available for you to drink.
Yeah, and it's sort of different cultural norms as you talk about.
Yeah, and the cultural norms I think are less focused on the transaction, the economics of like I'm here to sell you tea, and that's basically it. It's more like we're a tea shop, you're interested in my tea. There's a little more. I don't know. I feel a lot more at ease when I'm in a tea shop in Taipei versus Seattle, where I'm from.
Yeah, so. Interesting.
Yeah.
So you went to a number of tea shops. Did you go to tea houses or did you have any other tea related experiences abroad?
Yeah, definitely. So this trip, I actually didn't go to very many tea houses.
Which would include things like, just to interject real quick, things like Wistaria is not a tea shop so much as it is a tea house. A place where you sit down, you drink tea. You could buy tea from there, but it's a little more, I don't know, I guess you pay for the process of sitting down, so like a cafe.
Yeah. There's food options oftentimes at a tea house. Right. For a tea shop, you're just there for tea.
Smaller. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, it's a smaller kind of more tea centric experience.
Right.
So I I didn't go to tea houses this trip just because I knew that I wanted to spend most of my budget on the tea that I was taking home. And having been to Wistaria before a few times, and having that experience kind of under my belt, and knowing kind of like the type of tea that they serve,
right.
Knowing that there's other competitors like in the Yongkong district and stuff that do similar things to Wistaria in terms of they have small bites, interesting teas to try for like single sessions that they'll cook up there or have you brew up for yourself there. I was less interested in spending my time and money in that area versus trying out like a new shop or going and retrying a shop I had already been to. Because that second or third time you go to a shop, I think is really beneficial because you can kind of, you're familiar with it. And so for me, I rank that experience higher than like going to a tea house and trying a bunch of foodstuffs.
Right.
Another tea experience that I had recently was
in Taipei.
In Taipei, I was able to meet up with Max and Peter, who are in the tea scene, I guess you could say. They're on a few forums, Slack groups and such. I don't have a Facebook, but I think they're also over there. They're too.
In the tea underground.
Underground. Yes.
No R. Underground. Anyway.
Yeah, and that was a really cool experience because all three of us, you could say, are Westerners, or that would be like a label you could assign to us. And I think it's interesting to hear different people's experiences in regards to shopping in Taipei, figuring out kind of like what they're most interested in, and seeing and kind of experiencing going into shops and hearing that and having that experience is, I think, beneficial for somebody who, coming from my point of view, where I've been to Taipei a few times for myself, but I haven't ever heard of what other people's experiences are exploring Taipei in terms of the tea scene. So it was beneficial for me to kind of hear that and explore that with those guys. Peter coming from, this is his first time in Taipei, or was his first time in Taipei, I should say, and then Max having visited many times and recently moved to Taipei to teach and hang out and be awesome. So the experience that I had there, I think, was probably the highlight of my trip.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and being able to kind of like connect with folks like that. It's kind of like a small and very individualistic tea scene, I would say, like in the West, in the United States. Like
very disparate, yeah.
Yeah, you're often only like drinking tea with like one or two other guys, or like
in a small little hut in the middle of a lake.
Yes, yeah. With maybe there's like a heron or a crane like flying over.
Yeah, I'm watching one right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that that experience and being overall, like the Taipei experience, was definitely beneficial for me because I was able to just kind of firm up some of the ideas about my personal tea collection, where I want it to go, how I'd like it to be, because I'm in my mid-20s. I want to be able to kind of see my collection into the future and be able to say, like, hey, like, I got some cool stuff, like, when I'm older and, like, in my 50s that I can, like, pull out and be like, let's try this, let's have this, and being able to share teas in that way, I think is one of the reasons why I continue to collect teas, and I continue to keep teas for an extended period of time with the purpose of aging them. This trip, I was able to grab some oolong specific to that, and looking for like a really specific roasted oolong. I was able to find something that was really, it was, I guess you could say, standard in terms of what I was tasting initially, but it had good huigan. I didn't taste any sort of sourness or any sort of differences in between the two sessions that I had with the tea at the shop before I purchased it.
This is a roasted, unaged oolong.
You got it. Yeah. So,
so you'll be aging this.
I'll be aging this. Yeah. So I have about, I don't know, like 750 grams of this specific oolong to age now, and I'm looking forward to keeping oolong, because as we've talked in previous episodes, I think the climate in the West is such where there's not a whole lot of humidity, and for storing pu'erh, that can pose an issue where you have to supplement and add humidity in whatever environment, like a Pu'erh.
Yeah. And we've talked about this, I think, in previous episodes, but in theory, it's not like oolong has a long track record of having been aged in Seattle or anything like that. But in theory, you would think that it would be a good place for oolong to age, and and much easier than something like Pu'erh, where we have all these creative sort of like do-it-yourself solutions that we'll see also how those turn out in the long run.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah.
The average like RH relative humidity of like a normal room in Seattle, at least between us, is like around 40 RH, which is like way drier. So that's something beneficial for oolong.
Yeah, and you actually brought around a hygrometer with you, is that right?
I did, yeah. So there's...
So you brought around, to be clear, a device that shows you the temperature and the humidity.
Yeah.
You brought it with you to Taiwan to sort of see how the conditions, the living conditions and stuff might differ to Seattle. What did you find? Yeah,
so when I was in Taiwan, the second week I was there was a typhoon that hit, or not necessarily hit, but kind of moved past the city. And it definitely increased the humidity, just the normal humidity in my room. The AC I had going periodically, but I was thinking that AC would normally be able to create fluctuations in the humidity in a room. But I didn't really find that to be the case in the rooms that I had stayed in Taiwan. And I don't know if that's specific to the room, as in there was only like one window in both of these places, or if it was specific to how the building was made. Just like there wasn't a whole lot of airflow aside from the AC. So I was kind of surprised to see that a lot of ACs also just have like a dehumidifier built into them, so I could have like thrown that on too, if I was really wanting to get creative with my scientific method. But the normal kind of humidities that I was seeing were closer to the mid-70s.
Okay.
Especially
like just in sort of the living room.
Yeah,
living
just in like a bedroom living room situation where maybe there's one window, it's not necessarily open. I saw it once or twice spike up to 80 in my living space. This is mostly where I was keeping my hydrometer. And I would say that when it was raining, it was interesting because you could match basically like temperature to humidity. So like 80 degrees inside, 80 degrees, or like 80% humidity, which is like kind of a weird, for somebody who coming from a dry climate, you're just like, that's intense.
It's pretty humid.
Yeah.
Takes some adjustment, surely, as a human, not to mention Pu'erh.
Right. Yeah. So, as for me, like, I tasted a lot of tea that was Taiwan stored, and had been stored in Taiwan for a long time, and I think that tea is stuff that I enjoy most, which is like mildly dank, but maybe not as dank as something that was stored in like Malaysia or Hong Kong. Really hardcore. And so for me into the future, I think that's where I would look for more tea.
Right.
Is kind of look at more Taiwanese, specifically stored pu'erh that has been there for a majority of its life, instead of just for like a few years on the tail end of its life. It it's something that I think requires a lot more exploration. If I were to spend more time in Taiwan, that's what I would pay attention to more, because I think it's easy enough to find roasted oolong to age. I think it's easy enough. Well, it has its own complexities, but there's aged oolong available in Taiwan. But now that I have a large variety of it, and seeing kind of how difficult it is to find pu'erh specific to Taiwan, that's where I would like to look next.
So more for pu'erhs stored in Taiwan?
Stored specifically in Taiwan for longer periods.
I see.
But yeah.
To quickly piggyback on the sort of the natural humidity of Taiwan, if for the people that are skeptical of some of the solutions and just believe in storing pu'erh naturally on a shelf in the West, and or even in a cardboard box, which is, I guess, a step above a box, I think that this helps to sort of show why, at least in the case of the West is obviously a very big place, so there are more humid places and there are less humid places.
Yes.
Or in Seattle, but it helps show why the living conditions in Seattle are very different from Taiwan, how just storing tea either on the shelf or in a cardboard box may result in the tea sort of entering a really slow stasis where it's not aging much, or to actually dry out in a worst case. So it's why we will have these sort of creative solutions such as pomodors or I don't know, some sort of sealed storage to sort of keep the humidity higher. And yeah, so that's all I have to say about that. We're going to conclude with talking a little bit about communication and how that can be an issue at certain shops, and some of the things that you did to circumvent that problem or to just navigate that. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So in the previous video, the pre-trip video, I talked a little bit about the importance of arriving to a shop with a specific goal in mind, and I think that became even more clear for this trip, just because I knew that certain shops had certain teas.
And these are teas that you're not going to cold or randomly. They're teas that you know of. Yeah,
they're teas I've had before.
Okay.
So and I know that the shop in the past has carried. So for those shops, it was something that I could use to anchor the conversation initially and say, hey, do you have any of this specific, like oolong? Do you have any of the specific pu'erh? And having a picture of it with any sort of label or the original materials that came from it originally was definitely very helpful. It kind of helped break the ice to make sure to make it seem like, hey, oh, this guy actually has been here before. This is my product. Like, let's get him seated and tasting tea.
So it kind of, to go back to one of your earlier points, kind of cuts through the bullshit a little bit faster than it would otherwise. Gets you more in the direction of the teas you're interested in.
Right, yeah. So being organized in that way before arriving to Taiwan, if you're thinking about sourcing tea in Taiwan,
right.
Sourcing aged tea in Taiwan, I think is very important. But of course, if you've never been here before, where would you find like pictures of tea? I think that was something that I was thinking about beforehand too, and I actually made a few flashcards with phrases that I had translated using BabbleCarp, which is a tea lexicon. Very handy device, kind of a online tea lexicon that has a dictionary that you can put in Chinese characters, you can put in Romanization, English characters, and it will give you an approximation of what it thinks that is. So
you had physical flashcards?
I had physical flashcards. So I for different tea shops, oolong or pu'erh shops, I would bring a different set along, essentially saying like, hey, I want this roasted oolong, that has been roasted so many times, and that is like kind of new, but maybe not as new as like a green oolong. I had like a phrase like that translated. I had a phrase, I had like for when I wanted to try some fresh oolong. I had the tea mountain kind of with the pyramid with like the different heights on it, so I could kind of point and say like, hey, I want stuff that's up here. Now this isn't like a hard and fast rule. Like they could have been serving me something different. I don't 100% know that. I can't guarantee that, but at least this way they know where my interest is. And then the last thing, and we also talked about this in the last episode as well, is having a smartphone and being able to navigate Google Translate and Pleco with ease, I think is definitely helpful, because if you're going to Taipei and you haven't been before, you'll find a lot of people who have some pretty good English like vocabulary, but maybe they can't build the sentence. And that is helpful for kind of piecing together meaning. And then also another thing that I did was when I would get quoted a price for a tea, I would also have a small notebook kind of like this and a pencil, and I would record the price down in my notebook, so that way I could kind of keep a running tally of like, all right, so if I buy this tea, it's going to be this much. So that way when it came time to pony up, I already had an idea of what the total was going to be, and that way they weren't going to, like, I could kind of double check and make sure I was getting the right tea from them, especially for people who weren't English fluent. And, like, I ran into issues in regards to that, and so it's something that if you can do it in your head, that's even better, because you want to also come across as, like, not a complete what's the word I'm thinking of, but like not somebody who's like a complete you don't want to put somebody in a situation where they feel like they're in a lot of pressure, like all right, hold on, wait, how much was that, and all that, and let me translate that, let me get my app out, and blah, 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 blah. Like doing all that all at once can kind of really break up a conversation and break down that rapport building exercise, which is so important.
Yeah, you want to, so kind of going with the flow, you don't want to be that annoying guy that's like, excuse me, could you tell me the price? And you have to have everything reiterated, and you're doing math and stuff.
Yeah.
Don't be that guy.
Or just have a little more je ne sais quoi about it. Like, I like to be in control, I like to have things planned out, so like that was something that I personally had to work on, was like, all right, I gotta have as many ducks in the row as possible going into this store, so that way I don't have to think extra hard for this person, or I don't have to like break out my stuff, or right, like break out my list, my shopping list, and see like, wait a second, what was I getting here again? And then like, what have I already gotten? Yeah,
and to be clear, flashcards, if it wasn't obvious, it's something that's totally optional. But it's something that you found helpful for your particular sort of meticulous shopping style.
Yes.
But definitely the concept of just like knowing what you're after, how you can communicate that to get to the point. These things are just very helpful to know. I think the worst thing you could do is wander into a tea shop and be like, oh, it's tea, I'll have whatever's good. It's just like very, very ambiguous.
Yeah.
And it's just not going to get to the point. It sounds like you had a lot of success going back to these places. So I guess I will conclude with the final question of, would you go back to Taiwan?
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've explored Taipei like through and through for a few weeks now. And so I think exploring cities in the South End, as well as the East Coast, would be an amazing experience that I'd like to experience at some point in the future.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Garrett, for sharing with us some of your experiences traveling.
Yeah.
And we will see you all next time.
Thanks, guys.